Purple Skies, Chapter 1. The petrichor wasn't caused by morning dew. In fact, in that region, it's very rare for water to reach inland. The liquid only makes its way there on rare occasions during the cyclone season. Specifically, that corner of the desert wasn't even an open space, and the smell didn't exactly originate from that place. The dust transported from beyond the entrance portal to the cave, from far beyond the open space towards the depths, took several minutes to find the rare moisture of those lands. Before his eyes, the intense deep blue color, like his own eyes, and the golden earth were subdued by several meters of rocks. As he approached the bottom, stalagmites and stalactites framed the exterior, still illuminated by the glow of the nocturnal sky, almost touching dawn. An arid plain dotted with saguaros, cardones, bisnagas, and desert candles, at that hour, just before the relentless brilliance of the day, was barely sparking at the end of the mountain by a cave formed by countless filtrations bestowed by the inexorable passage of water and time from the highest point of the Sierra de San Pedro Martir, slowly venturing into the cave towards the unknown, with only a few centimeters of visibility and the heat of the makeshift torch made of frayed fabric and a bit of oil. He fumbled his way to the end of the drop that could be faintly heard. It was as if, unintentionally, he was challenging centuries of rain in that cave. Searching desperately, he found a small pool that, upon touching it, brought his parched, dry lips fervently to its edge. His skin had become weathered from days of endless walks in these long-forgotten lands, abandoned for decades after the extermination of the incessant coming and going in the cities further north. Life in the far south was somewhat similar to how it used to be, but he had come into the world when it was understood that things were not that way, and no one needed to be told how they should be. After drinking from the aged pool for what felt like years, he was left bloated with the delightful coolness of the cave, unmoving, waiting for the day to wreak havoc on the desert creatures. With the sun now on the horizon, he decided to exit the cave. Standing on the stone floor, he contemplated making one last offering to the sun and spilling his blood until the last drop on the desert floor. He wondered if it would be worth it to continue wandering in circles between the Sierras and the seas of the peninsula, or if his blood would be better spent nourishing the coyotes and desert creatures, even though no one would ever see that blood, not the scavengers, nor the patient souls who might venture that far. It would be an offering that would not bring joy to any being for hundreds or perhaps thousands of kilometers around or anywhere else, not feeding any beasts or divine beings. From his backpack, he took out a knife and, pointing the blade at his wrist, perceived a phrase on the ground as he saw his tattooed wrist adorned with a bunch of meaningless words. The phrase on the ground read, New Pedrara Mexican Onyx Company. He soon forgot about the silver blade against his wrist and dusted off the letters on the hard stone. It resembled marble and was finely polished. The beautiful white of the rock transported him to a moment when he accompanied his grandfather to see a performance alluding to the last Comic-Con at the Spreckles Theater in his city. It was the only vivid memory he had of his grandfather, who was surrounded by ornate white stone decorations with translucent onyx that allowed the daylight to create an impressive atmosphere in the Spreckles. He remembered his grandfather saying that that place was meant to be indestructible, that only the fire-resistant asbestos curtains were 2 inches thick. He thought that perhaps that place would still exist after the war. If he found that construction indestructible, many things would still stand, life itself in other cities would continue to thrive, embraced by structures like the Spreckles Theater on streets with multiple directions traveled by countless men and women. The next morning, after collecting the unsuccessful traps set the previous night, he headed north. The plan was to explore the coast and go fishing until he reached the other side of the border where he was born and cross the old wall that paradoxically guarded against illegal incursions by people from various countries in the south and the rest of the world. The barrier had made evacuating the city on the other side extremely difficult during those tumultuous times, but now the rust on the metal barrier made it easier to access than opening a door. Moreover, the only inhabitants of those cities were rats and vermin that had managed to adapt to the nuclear contingency. Gradually, crossing canyons, valleys, and plateaus, circling mountain ranges and hills, he could already see the Mediterranean vegetation near the coast, almost reaching a large bay before sunset. The sound of rattlesnakes urged him to keep moving and not tempt fate by staying in a place where it would have been easier to be attacked by a rattlesnake than to set up camp. So, he continued for a few more kilometers until he left the shrubbery and reached the sand. However, fatigue prevented him from taking more than a step into the coastal dune. Lack of time to go fishing took its toll, and his strength faded as soon as he touched the golden grains glistening in the emerging moonlight. His mouth savored the salt left by the water, and his eyes could no longer see the light reflected on the sea. Unconscious for many hours and well into the early morning, submerged in the dream world, a reverie warned him to summon strength from the last shreds of his flesh and flee an imminent danger. He tried to wake up but found it impossible to move his body. It was a Herculean task. Until, in his dreams, a flame that swept through the bushes sought the snug skin of his bones, and the flame began to burn his foot. He didn't understand what was happening until, without warning, a deep sorrow plunged him into an infinite black abyss. He only felt himself being dragged along a path that had no color, distance, or beginning. And so, without knowledge of time or space, a faint light reached his eyes, already accustomed to the darkness. Above him, a palm roof and the scent of burning wood filled him with fear until a voice gently said. With curiosity sharper than the pain, he gradually walked until he reached that pair of elderly individuals who seemed to be the only inhabitants of the place. After an obvious reminder of the time of day, he asked, "Is there more people around here?" "Yes, although not close, they are in the mountains. After this date, we're heading up. Only those who can't handle the journey and those who can carry the catch stay here. After the winter, it's better up there. There's good hunting, and the air is better." "Where are you from, and what are you doing here?" "I'm going to San Diego, California, to see if it's possible to live there." "There's nothing there. The radiation is still very strong. It gets worse if you go from here to there." "How's it going up there?" "Well, the only issue is the winter frosts. Other than that, everything's fine. In fact, it has always been that way, at least during my grandparents' time. Until it wasn't possible anymore, and we stayed in the farmlands. But right now, you can't live there. Here, we still get rain, and the grapevines and orange trees do well. Although over the years, there are fewer of us, living conditions are tough. But in our old lands, further north, none of us would survive due to radiation. How about you?" "I'm fine, as if I had returned from another world, literally. It's good to be back." "Do you know if there are more towns nearby?" "There's nothing, just us. We've managed more or less, but there are probably more towns, villages, or even cities further south. The desert is harsh, and then you'd have to cross the Gulf or go around through La Rumorosa or via de la Trinidad to reach the Colorado River Delta. After that, you'd have the Gulf of Santa Clara. It's a long journey, and you'd only be getting started. There's the Gila Desert and the Altar Desert, then all of Sonora, and even further south, who knows how you'd manage. We're fine here, and this is how we've always lived. So, now it wouldn't be much different." "Do you live in any town?" "No, I've always roamed the desert. Sometimes when food is scarce, I spend seasons on the coasts. In winter, it's the Gulf, and in summer, it's the Pacific. You should try to reach my people up there. If you're a good person and help out, they'll let you stay." "Thank you, but I need to know if people still live the way we used to. I want to go where you mentioned. If you really think you can handle it, go south. The only problem will be crossing the Gulf, but you'll surely find a boat along the shore. These days, it's getting calmer north of the Gulf, but in the south, the hurricanes are starting to come in. If you hurry, you can head into the sea during good weather. There's nothing waiting for you in San Diego. Don't go there." Noah lowers his gaze and moves his foot forward. "As soon as I heal, I'll hit the road. I'm going to the beach to help with fishing." Turning around, he looks for the path to the beach, where a couple of fishermen, in the middle of their workday, welcome him and give him simple instructions, taking into account his still recovering state. He learns the path that would be the beginning and end of his journey for several days. Diligently, he tries to help during this time, sometimes with little luck and other times with none. His skills are better suited for salting and carrying fish. Several days pass until the strength in his legs allows him to continue his journey, this time heading south, mimicking the birds he watches in the winter, too far to catch but close enough to observe. One of those afternoons, while salting the fish, he plans to leave at dawn, take his share of the catch, and cross the rough roads that separate the bay from the desert. The next day, as if awakened by an alarm clock, the light ignites his desire to leave immediately and face the cruel path that had made him flee from the rattlesnakes weeks before. Gradually, in the passing hours, the crosses in the sand left by the roadrunner's feet, the saguaro thorns, and the desert heat announced that he is entering the most inhospitable part of what has been his home for many years. As he goes around the hills, he not only sees the tracks of birds and snakes in the sand but also the footprints of a predator, a mountain lion. And it's not just the tracks, the musk of the cat alerts him. He has been feeling watched for kilometers, maybe by another human, maybe by an animal. He's not sure. What concerns him is where he will find a safe place to spend the night. As he approaches the mountains, he makes sure to survive one more night. The huge granite rocks scattered at the base of the mountains offer him unfathomable hideouts even for the most skillful panther. Heading towards the rock where he would keep an eye on his dreams, he sets traps for breakfast along the way. Hopefully, a snake will find its way to his plate, and if he's lucky, a pronghorn would secure his food for the day, and the chosen nook was still warm from the departed sunlight. Spreading rosemary leaves on his bedding assured him of keeping insects away. A patched-up tent provided him shelter. The dense desert air led him into the drowsiness he had experienced for weeks since that night on the beach when he couldn't tell the difference between the physical and the mental, where he couldn't distinguish the dream world from wakefulness. Since then, his dreams often took him into the irrational realm of unconsciousness. His sensations existed on a plane between the subtle and the crude, and his desire to verify that the physical world wasn't what he had known so far only grew stronger. He was caught between the intangible world and the limited, well-known, and predictable material world. Over his slight body, there was no longer air, and beneath it, the dense flesh covering his bones. In this state, he no longer felt fear or hunger. The colors of the desert were even more vivid, and in the sky, he could sense uncharted paths, a feeling of novelty that he had long lost in his daily conscious life. Beneath the earth, heat and mysterious worlds must exist thousands of meters away, on the other side of the world, or even closer, on the other side of the gulf. As he continued on the path he had walked, he could influence his prey when he encountered them, though sometimes it was no longer a challenge. When the sun emerged, bidding farewell to that world brought a sense of melancholy, reminding him of his walks amidst the skyscrapers of downtown San Diego, just a few miles from his grandfather's house. Before his eyes, the sea of saguaros and almost endless candlewood cacti prevented him from seeing his traps, but he knew his prey was ready. Before emerging from among the rocks, he caught a whiff of the musk from the feline that had been stalking him for some time. Instantly, he prepared an obsidian-tipped arrow and, at the slightest sign of a target on the cat's body, he wouldn't hesitate to annihilate it, unless the cat got to him first. Dodging the cacti, he arrived at the trap where he knew he would find his prey, but the breath of another being alerted him. He aimed his bow 360 degrees and even at the top of the cactus to be sure, but he couldn't locate his stalker. He proceeded to free a pronghorn from the trap, excellent catch for the day. As he prepared to carry the game, he looked up, and a huge puma was sitting on its hind legs. Slowly, he reached for his bow and arrow, but the emaciated and feeble mountain lion, wagging its tail, didn't seem like a threat. He thought twice and, instead of readying his bow and arrow, he placed the pronghorn on the ground and started to butcher it, tossing small pieces to the feline that seemed to have eluded its prey for a long time. Leaving behind the remains, except for the meat, he continued on his journey. After packing up his camp. As he traversed the familiar paths, several hours later, in the blue dusk with a palette of pink hues streaking across the sky, a massive bird with gray wings and a white chest, seemingly an albatross, signaled to him that the other shore, the Gulf of California, was on par with the horizon. The idea was clear and fixed: to find the route to Sonora or Sinaloa by sea before the hurricane season. Following an old mission route, far from the 20th century asphalt, he came across a bay, and in the water at its center, there were curious circles. They didn't appear to be algae or anything natural. Exhausted from nearly a day of travel, he decided to camp. The quality of the sand and the warmth of the environment meant he didn't need to set up his tent. As he was absorbed by the gentle sway of the tide, his heart nearly stopped when he felt a cold metal touch on his neck. It was the muzzle of an ancient firearm.